Hello, everyone. This is Darcinovia here. I did a lot of soul searching, and I believe I'm making the right call by having the Lore Talk Anakin Skywalker being a pre recorded video. This is the first in a while that I have edited a podcast myself, but this should be fun. I know there's a good amount of people in my audience that would prefer that I do this live, but considering that I know my audience would rather that I do a live stream where I'm more free to interact with them without being afraid of changing the topic of the video. So I'm going to do this for those who purely care about the Star Wars lore talk. Now, Anakin Skywalker is one of those characters that I feel like a lot of us can relate to. At least those of you who grew up during, post 9/11, who became of age not too long after. I came of age in 2006, shortly before the housing, crash, and shortly before the recession, that hit my generation hard and made it difficult to get a job. Anakin Skywalker is somebody that I feel like all of us is and could be if the circumstances, are different in our lives. If we don't have the family support, if we don't, have a father figure to look up to, if we don't have a positive role model that isn't, somebody that could manipulate us into something that we would not want to be. Any of us could be Anakin if we were young men who had dreams that we wanted, to accomplish. But when the reality of that dream being impossible hits you in the face, we become disillusioned, and we go into a dark place. I believe a lot of us were Anakin at one point or another. And I do feel like Anakin is somebody that's, more relatable than Luke in a lot of ways. Especially for, my generation. My generation, we don't really see much hope for the future. We were optimistic when we were young, but we became more pessimistic as we got older. And some of us are becoming like a Darth Vader. Maybe not a literal, basically be able to command a bunch of deaths, squads, but you get the point. That I do feel like Anakin is the person that represents the generation that was promised impossible things, and Anakin's fall to the dark side is the failure of the institutions, that existed in the Star Wars universe. Now, was it the Jedi's fault that Anakin fell to the dark side? Well, I'm going to do a dive on Anakin. This is my personal opinion. I don't, say this is my word and this is the only word that matters. There's people that will likely have other opinions that are probably, going to conflict with mine. Or there's people that'll probably have a video about Anakin that will make this video look amateurish by comparison. But this is just a Star Wars fan that's just having fun and just wants to discuss his favorite franchise and discuss one of his favorite characters in the Star Wars franchise. Sit back and enjoy. This is my Star Wars lore talk on Anakin Skywalker. Now, one thing I'm going to make clear in this, podcast, I will be using, stuff from Legends and canon, though mostly Legends, because Legends is what I'm familiar with, and I am not in the mood to really heavily research what's currently in canon. If I do use stuff from canon, it's mostly going to be from the Clone Wars animated series. I'm not going to be using, stuff that may have been written in a book somewhere or a comic that was written after 2014. I'm only using stuff if it's from canon from the Clone Wars TV series and maybe Rebels, but that's about it. I will not be using that much material from canon. If you want a canon, analysis on, Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader, I suggest other videos for that. This is mostly EU centric. Without further ado, I'm going to begin with, Anakin Skywalker, The Rise and Fall. I did a quick research really quick before actually discussing this portion. Anakin Skywalker, his birthplace is unknown. What is revealed in the Rise of Darth Vader story is Anakin was born 3 years before he came to Tatooine. Now, Anakin Skywalker spent most of his childhood on Tatooine, and this would leave a long impression on Anakin for the rest of his life. Now, for those of you who have any basic understanding of psychology, what children experience, in childhood do impact them long after, their childhood is behind them. And Anakin's, slavery on Tatooine is tragic in a way, considering Anakin was never truly free, as a person. Either a slave on Tatooine or a slave to the Jedi Council and a slave to Darth Sidious. But I'll get to that later. Anakin on, Tatooine, when we see him in episode 1, I'm discussing this because there's not much material in the EU is shown with Anakin before episode 1. Anakin sees a Jedi and is shown to be very strong in the Force. Now, Anakin at this point has only heard stories about the Jedi. And Anakin at this age, at the age of 9, almost 10, according to the episode 1 novelization, thinks very highly of the Jedi and basically thinks of them like gods. Qui-Gon Jinn's first meeting with Anakin leaves a strong impression on him. And honestly, if you paid attention to the movie and the novelization of episode 1, Anakin and Qui-Gon have a bond almost immediately. And I think there's huge indications here. Qui-Gon Jinn, say what you will about the character. I know there's a lot of Star Wars fans that don't like the character, don't find him interesting, but I think Qui-Gon Jinn is one of the most misunderstood Star Wars characters. Qui-Gon Jinn was the father figure Anakin needed in his life. And honestly, the death of Qui-Gon was a tragedy. It really was. Not because, Qui-Gon, was a great Jedi. It was a tragedy because Qui-Gon was possibly the only person in the Jedi Order that could have properly trained Anakin without Anakin falling to the dark side. Anakin needed a father figure. He had none when he lived on Tatooine. And a lot of young men, I don't want to, sound like a crazy conservative here. I do feel like, a lot of us don't really have good father figures. I'm speaking mostly for myself. Anakin not having a father figure, left a void in his life. He had no, male to look up to that was actually strong. And the only other person that actually did that was Palpatine. I'll get to him later. Qui-Gon Jinn, if you pay attention to all of his scenes with Anakin, he acts very much like the father Anakin needed. He was stern but fair. He was compassionate as well. This is something you don't really see from the Jedi in the prequels. And I know a lot of people complain about the prequels, not portraying the Jedi in the way that they were, described in the original trilogy. But if you really think about it, Qui-Gon Jinn is basically what the Jedi are supposed to be. They're supposed to follow the will of the Force. They're supposed to be compassionate. They're not, like you see from the Jedi Council, who are, out of touch with the reality of what's going on in the Republic and out of touch with the average people. The Jedi are supposed to use their ability to, protect those who can't protect themselves. And Qui-Gon represents what the Jedi are supposed to be. I know some people will bring this up. If Qui-Gon was so noble, why didn't he free all the slaves on Tatooine? That's a good point. But they had no time. There was a lot at stake in episode 1. If he had focused, freeing all the slaves on Tatooine, there would be no time to stop what's going on Naboo. But that's a different discussion for a different time. Anakin was the chosen one. I know the chosen one debate is something that a lot of Star Wars fans don't like to, they feel like it's cliche, it's a cop-out. But the chosen one, I might discuss that in a separate video. It's too much to discuss here about Anakin, whether he should or should not have been the chosen one. Anyway, Qui-Gon Jinn is what Obi-Wan was in episode 4. Obi-Wan was the wise old wizard that you would see later, in the Star Wars timeline. Qui-Gon Jinn is basically what Obi-Wan will be in 40 years. And what Luke will be in 40 or 50 years, depending on which canon you follow. I'm going by Legends. Qui-Gon, is an important character to Anakin's storyline, because if Qui-Gon had, died, before he met Anakin, Anakin would have been found by somebody else, and I don't think Obi-Wan would have left the same impression of the Jedi that Qui-Gon did. Now, I find this interesting, actually, regarding, the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, and I do feel like the Duel of Fates has more meaning now that when you think about it. No, I'm not going by what Dave Filoni and all that other nonsense. I do believe that the Force does have a will. Qui-Gon was the intended master for Anakin Skywalker. And I do feel like the Force does have a plan to some extent, but I do feel like that plan can get disrupted. And Darth Maul killing Qui-Gon Jinn did seal Anakin's fate. I do feel like had Qui-Gon survived, Anakin would not have fallen to the dark side. And the Darth Plagueis, novel, Darth Plagueis was scared of Qui-Gon. He saw him as a threat, that he could not train Anakin. And if you don't believe me, just read the novel again. He actually does, see Anakin as a threat to their plans. Anakin would likely have destroyed the Sith earlier had Qui-Gon trained Anakin instead of Obi-Wan. But that's, open for debate. We'll discuss that maybe at a future video if I want to discuss what if, Qui-Gon trained Anakin. Anyway, the death of Qui-Gon Jinn is a significant blow to Anakin, because Anakin now is forced to be trained by somebody he barely knows, who he has no connection with, really, Force-wise, and is not sure that Obi-Wan really wants to train him. Now, this is elaborated further in the Jedi Quest novels, where Anakin is, doesn't feel like Obi-Wan really wants him, and it does feel that way. You don't see Obi-Wan and Anakin really connect until about almost halfway through Jedi Apprentice, because Obi-Wan basically starts off training Anakin as a promise and more of an obligation. He didn't really want to train Anakin. because what Anakin needed was not a brother, but he needed a father, and Anakin and Obi-Wan was just not, wise enough. He wasn't experienced enough to train Anakin. Had and not to mention Obi-Wan's ways of, the Force, his ways of the Jedi was a hindrance. Anakin's failure, was basically, it's not completely Anakin's fault. It's, Obi-Wan to some extent is at fault for why Anakin failed ultimately. It didn't actually do what he was meant to do. It's because Obi-Wan was not experienced enough to train Anakin, and he was too orthodox as a Jedi to actually train Anakin in the way he needed to be trained. And Obi-Wan Anakin would eventually, as, we would see in the Clone Wars animated series, both the 2003 and 2008 series, and various materials related to them, like the books and comics, they would actually become more like friends, more like brothers. That would eventually happen, but it took them years for them to get to that point. Which is an interesting point, that honestly, when you think about it. Anakin, I know I'm focusing on other aspects, but again, if you're going to talk about Anakin, you have to bring up the people around him. I know we're going to bring up the elephant in the room, Padme. We'll do that in a bit. But Anakin's, training, there was a lot to expect from Anakin. There's some Jedi that didn't even want to train him. And Anakin, the once optimistic youth who, saw a bright future with the Jedi and thought, and actually had dreams of, being a Jedi and freeing slaves, became, the very opposite of what he wanted. Anakin, by the time you see him in episode 2, a lot of people like to complain about how whiny Anakin is, but if you actually, if you want to put yourself in Anakin's shoes for a second, and I'm not going by headcount, I'm just going by think about what you were like at Anakin's age. You're on the verge of adulthood, but you're an adult but not quite an adult, and things are wrong. You shouldn't feel this way, but you do. It's like Anakin. It was us when we were his age. When I was his age, I was a whiny little bitch who complained about everything. Don't deny it. Anybody that I feel like a lot of the people that don't like Anakin in episode 2 see themselves in Anakin, that they are whiny or were whiny at that age. And I think Anakin was realistic in that way. And I feel like, Anakin Skywalker, he never really had a normal childhood, and he never actually got a chance to live like a teenager. Because the thing that the Jedi forces you to do, they force you, to basically almost purge yourself of emotions. And it's almost impossible to actually function. The Jedi were so, extreme with attachments that is why, Anakin, their greatest failure, ultimately turned on them. But I'll get to that, when I get to the elephant in the room, Padme Amidala, and Anakin's relationship. And, well, let's get on to the next section. Anakin Skywalker, whether it's canon or legends, it's obvious in both that Anakin's relationship with his Jedi peers was a mixed bag, to say the least. Anakin, from my interpretation of what I've read from, the various materials in the EU, now, it may be the same for canon, but for the point in this video, I'm going to focus on legends here, because there's very few that's really written at this point in time and currently in canon, about Anakin Skywalker and his, pre-episode 2. There's like one comic, and I haven't read it, so I'm going to go by what I've read from the EU, but I don't think it's that much different in canon when it comes to Anakin's relationship with his peers. Though Legends, there is a lot more, you can find. Though in Legends, there isn't that much written about Anakin before Episode 2, but there is, some materials like Rogue Planet, the Jedi Quest novels, the Jedi Apprentice Special Editions 2, that basically gets into, Anakin's relationship with Obi-Wan prior to Episode 2 and how we've seen Anakin's relationship with other Jedi. It ain't like Anakin did not have friends, in the Jedi Order. It's just Anakin's, friend group in the Jedi Order was very small. Anakin also did not have a good relationship with a certain Jedi, and I'm going by the EU. We don't know at this point in time if Anakin has a Ferris Oden in canon. Hopefully I pronounced that name right. Ferris Oden in Legends was Anakin's rival in the Jedi Quest series. Their relationship was antagonistic, to say the least, which would carry over when Anakin becomes Darth Vader, which I'll cover Darth Vader in a different video. Anakin Skywalker, unlike his other Jedi that, he worked with from time to time, he actually knew what it was like to live a life outside the Order. Because the Jedi and the Jedi Order is all they knew, and the Jedi Order is their family. Anakin, knowing what it's like to actually have friends, knowing what it's like to have, a mother, Anakin, knows what it's like to live a non-Jedi life. So Anakin has, something the other Jedi do not have, and Anakin, in a way, never truly fit in. And the Jedi's rigid rules about attachments, I feel like, set Anakin's, down a path of self-destruction. Anakin does have the character flaw, which was established in Episode 1, of not really taking change too well. Well, Anakin had high expectations for the Jedi, and his expectations, were different from the reality. Now, we wouldn't see, that much of Anakin's development in this period, but what little we do get from the Jedi Quest novels, Anakin's relationship, with Obi-Wan especially, was pretty rocky at first. But he does eventually form a brother-like relationship with Obi-Wan. But his other Jedi that he's worked with, he never got that close connection. The only other Jedi that he did, and since I'm going to mainly talk about canon when I talk about her, Ahsoka Tano. Unlike, Mace Windu, who he has always had an antagonistic relationship with from the very start, he never, really had Mace Windu's respect. Mace Windu only saw Anakin, because of the prophecy of the Chosen One. And in the Shattered Point novel, Mace Windu sees Anakin as one of the most important people in the galaxy. The Jedi never saw Anakin as, a human being. They never saw him as anything more than just a Chosen One in a prophecy, though there are Jedi that actually denied that he was the Chosen One. But Ahsoka, like Obi-Wan, was one of the few Jedi in the Order that Anakin was able to feel more like himself. He didn't have to hide of who he was when he was around Ahsoka. And the issue with the Jedi Order is attachments. Attachments are neither good nor bad. It's letting attachments become possessiveness. And that was Anakin's flaw. He was afraid of losing what was important to him. And that could carry over to his relationship with Padme, which I'll get into that later in the video. Ahsoka and Anakin in the Clone Wars, their relationship would not have the best start. But for those who read the novelization of the Clone Wars movie, there's an interesting passage in the book that basically has Anakin when he looks at Ahsoka, he remembers how the Jedi treated him when he first got into the Jedi Order. Though I'll make it, I'm just gonna say, Karen Traviss had no love for the Jedi when she wrote, Star Wars novels. For those who have, read the Republic Commando series or her books in Legacy of the Force would know what I'm talking about. But I think Karen Traviss did do Anakin right in the Clone Wars movie by actually comparing Anakin to Ahsoka, because in the novel, in both the novel and the movie, it didn't, more the novel, Ahsoka didn't seem to be wanted anywhere, and it actually made sense for Ahsoka to be the Padawan of Anakin. Now, I rejected her being Anakin's Padawan purely because I don't think Anakin should have a Padawan. I still stand by that. But if you look at how Ahsoka was in the Clone Wars and how Anakin was when he was still a Padawan during Episode 2, they are a lot alike. And that's why they clicked so well together. Anakin and Ahsoka were like, Obi-Wan and Anakin. You couldn't imagine one without the other. At least that's how Star Wars fans see Anakin now, because Ahsoka is such a huge part of Star Wars lore now that it's impossible to separate Ahsoka's story with Anakin's. As much as I do not agree with the decision of giving Anakin a Padawan, in canon, there is no, character that's as influential to Anakin's fall to the dark side as Ahsoka. Had Ahsoka been around with Anakin during the times when he desperately needed support during the events of Revenge of the Sith, it's possible the events of the movie would have turned out differently. But that's just speculation. Ahsoka was one of the most important people in Anakin's life. And when she left the Jedi Order, Anakin would not know, what to do. The only other people he could truly trust is Obi-Wan and Padme and Palpatine. But as we all know, Palpatine is basically the father of lies and would actually put lies into Anakin's head over time about the Jedi, mixing them with the truth, how the Jedi are actually using him and holding him back or taking advantage of him. Now, the Jedi's lack of trust in Anakin is another thing that set Anakin down to the path to the dark side. Because with very little people to trust and them, and him not trusting them, Anakin was susceptible to the dark side of the Force. Of course, Anakin's, isn't completely blameless. I mean, he has made his own decision, and part of his downfall is his own fault. But I'm mostly focusing on Anakin's relationships here and how that influenced Anakin's development. Now, Ahsoka, when the last time we see her in the Clone Wars, and Anakin, you cannot help, if you are a fan of this character, and feel emotional inside when you see that episode and the Siege of Mandalore, of holy shit, this could have easily went differently had Anakin went to Ahsoka on the Siege of Mandalore. And now, I will have to give Dave Filoni, that is good storytelling. As much as I don't like Ahsoka's inclusion to Anakin's story, it is an important part of Anakin's story now. And, well, I'm going to be moving on to, other aspects. I'm going to actually talk about some of the choices Anakin made. And before I get on to his relationship with Palpatine and Padme. Now, I have talked about Anakin's relationship with other characters because it is important to discuss on how those people have affected Anakin. Because had Anakin been trained by Qui-Gon Jinn, his development would have been far different. Anakin's view of the Force would be different. Anakin's, who knows, Anakin's relationship with the Jedi would have been different. I don't think it would have been the most friendly relationship, but it would never have been as antagonistic as it became towards the end of the Clone Wars. But we cannot completely say that Anakin is completely blameless and he didn't do anything wrong, because he did. Anakin, he disobeyed orders from time to time with the Jedi, whether it's justified or not. He committed war crimes in the Clone Wars. He massacred the Sand People. He choked his wife in Revenge of the Sith. And I'm not going to talk about what he would do as Darth Vader, because that's like another can of worms. I'm just focusing on Anakin. Anakin Skywalker, his own choices led to his downfall, but those choices were influenced by the people that he was friends with, people that he actually had strong connections to. Had he had a less antagonistic relationship with the Jedi, Anakin would have not have been so willing to betray the Jedi so sunnily in Revenge of the Sith. And if you've read all the material, in the original Clone Wars Mycos, project in Clone Wars 2003, where everything that came out in between episode 1, 2 and 3, there's a lot of context for why Anakin would betray the Jedi. And then there's the Clone Wars, TV series in 2008, which also gives context. So Anakin's betrayal of the Jedi Order is not as far-fetched as you would think. In fact, I argue you could separate, that material completely, and it still wouldn't be far-fetched, because if you really think about it, what have the Jedi really done for him or the galaxy? The Republic is corrupt. They don't do anything about it. They betray their principles, and Anakin's beliefs in the Jedi was shattered completely when Mace Windu, whether Mace Windu was in the right or not, he was in the right of wanting to kill Palpatine, but Mace Windu, violating the Jedi's own code, that might be a discussion for a different time with Mace Windu. Mace Windu basically giving into his own, anger, because if I'll get into Mace Windu later in detail in a later video. Mace Windu, learning that Palpatine was behind everything, and many Jedi that he, had as friends fell to the dark side or died in the Clone Wars because of Palpatine, Mace Windu act impulsively. And is Mace Windu any more guilty than Anakin in this instance? No, he acted impulsively, and so did Anakin. Anakin knew immediately he made the wrong choice, but he knew he couldn't go back. And as a result, he essentially sold his soul to the devil. That was Darth Sidious. Now, before we get into Darth Sidious and how that would affect Anakin as a whole, we have to go back to the elephant in the room, like I discussed earlier, Padme Amidala, because without her, Anakin's downfall would have probably have happened in a far different way. Or we may not have had the story that we all know and love. Anyway, I'm going to go to the section that I believe is important. Padme Amidala. Whether you think Anakin and Padme's, love story is cringe or creepy, It's completely irrelevant because I'm just going to talk about Anakin's relationship with Padme. I'm not going to argue if it was, toxic or not, because it's obvious that it wasn't the most healthy relationship for either one of them. They both hid their relationship because of their positions. If it was found out she was married to a Jedi, there'd be a scandal. And Anakin would be expelled from the Order. So, to say this, I don't think Padme is completely innocent in this situation, if I have to be real. Because, if I have to be honest, if Padme rejected Anakin's advances and had she not, did what she did and attacked the clones, I think things would be different. So, Padme is not completely blameless in this whole thing. Because Padme was older, she should have known better. Anakin was like he was 20, yeah, barely out of his teens. His mind isn't like in the right place yet. Padme, should have backed off. So I'm not saying that Anakin is all to blame for this, but let's stop talking about logic, because love is illogical. I know as someone who's been in love before, it doesn't make sense. Love, you can't explain it. It just happens. But Anakin's love, I do feel like, there's different kinds of love, and Anakin was possessive. And depending on what canon you follow, in Legends, we don't see much of Padme. In Legends related material, so we don't see, the relationship and how it could be seen as a little bit as toxic. The Clone Wars micro series, though, we have seen some aspect of, but then again, I wouldn't blame Anakin for being pissed off if someone was basically trying to get his woman. But the issue was, unlike, a person in the real world, Anakin is force sensitive. He could have basically crushed, Cortus's windpipe if he wished. And the fact that in this arc in the Clone Wars, the fact that, this didn't destroy their relationship is a miracle. Now, had things been different, could Anakin and Padme's relationship had worked? No. In my opinion, it wouldn't. I believe just Anakin was just too possessive, honestly. Anakin wasn't willing to let things go. And not to mention, Anakin's, experience with his mother made him afraid of what would happen to Padme. And Anakin's own fear is what would ultimately destroy, their marriage. Anakin's own fear and his unwillingness to actually accept that there's things that you cannot change is what actually caused their relationship to basically break apart. Now, you can argue that this relationship was terribly written, that George Lucas is horrible at romances. If you're going to use that argument, then we might as well say the Han and Leia relationship is shit. And well, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. And I'm not going to die in that can of worms, though, regarding Han and Leia's relationship being just as cringe, if you want to go by that logic, as Anakin and Padme. But Anakin and Padme's relationship, it failed because Anakin was never given the chance to actually have a functioning relationship. Now, this is all speculation, but had Anakin been allowed to have a relationship with Padme openly, without worrying about getting expelled from the Jedi Order, without worrying about things happening to Padme, would their relationship be different? Possibly. But that's hard to say. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't legitimate things with Anakin and Padme, But then again, if we're taking the Clone Wars into account, if you take the expanded universe into account, I like to think of Anakin and Padme, their relationship was actually far, you know, better than it was in canon. But the reason it wasn't as healthy as we would like we see in Han and Leia or Luke and Mara Jade is because the circumstances behind their relationship was toxic. Like their relationship was written to be a tragic romance to be at the very start. Their relationship could have never have lasted because of that reason. And the moment their relationship ended is when Anakin betrayed everything he was and betrayed Padme by force choking her. And I'm going to die on this hill, but Anakin killed her by breaking her heart. And from a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan would say, Palpatine told the truth. In your anger, you killed her. Now, Padme and Anakin, I still hold this pairing, as a special place in my heart because especially when I was a teenager, I had a thing for romances that ended in tragedy. And I couldn't help but think, I wonder what would have happened differently had this and this have happened. Could Anakin and Padme, made their relationship work? Only if the circumstances were different. Maybe if Anakin had a different master, Qui-Gon. Maybe if Anakin did not, had to deal with the rigid rules of the Jedi Order. But that's all speculation. And there's nothing in canon to prove this is the case. This is just wishful thinking. Anakin Skywalker, I honestly do not think, ever learned, to let things go or to accept that there's things you cannot change. And as Yoda, said, looking into the future is dangerous because anything could happen. Anakin's obsession with wanting to control things he couldn't, change. Anakin was obsessed with control. He wanted to control, the thing that you cannot realistically control, death. And death is a part of life. Anakin could not accept that, which is why he ultimately lost Padme and everyone that he ever loved. That is the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. But I'm going to elaborate on that further because I'm going to talk about the devil himself, Darth Sidious, and how Darth Sidious is what basically broke the camel's back when it came to Anakin's ultimate downfall. Darth Sidious, or Palpatine, no, I am not calling him fuck by his freaking first name. Fuck that. It's stupid. I don't acknowledge that. Palpatine is probably one of the most important people that would influence Anakin till the end of his life, and that is Palpatine. Palpatine, when Anakin first meets him in Episode 1, I don't know what his thoughts were, but I do know that Palpatine in the Darth Plagueis novel, from the very beginning, he intended to have Anakin be his apprentice. Now, the only reason it was possible for Anakin to trust Palpatine as much as he did, because unlike, everybody else, Anakin knew what it was like to have parents. He never had a father, and the closest thing he had to a father figure, Qui-Gon Jinn, was dead. Palpatine was the only person that could fill that void. And as a result, Anakin was able to tell Palpatine things he couldn't tell Obi-Wan or Padme. And as a result of their developing relationship, Anakin and Palpatine, became best friends. And I would say Palpatine was Anakin's best friend outside of Obi-Wan. And Palpatine was one of the people he trusted the most. He was able to tell him secrets that he couldn't tell anybody else. And in a way, Anakin and Palpatine had a special relationship, like a father and a son. But this was the most abusive relationship of all of them, because Palpatine took advantage of Anakin, manipulated him, and boosted his confidence and his ego. In fact, I would probably say Palpatine is most of the reason why Anakin was as arrogant as he was in episode 2, and Anakin thinking that he is better than he actually is. I think Palpatine was the one that fed his ego. Palpatine told Anakin what he wanted to hear, and that is the problem, with not having a figure like Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon would have taught Anakin and told him what he needed to hear, not what he wanted to hear. And when you hear something you want to hear, it's detrimental to your development, and it opens up for you to be manipulated by devils like Darth Sidious. Now, there are Darth Sidiouses out in the real world. I'm not going to get, political here, but insert any evil person in history who has manipulated their populations, and you'll, know what I'm talking about. Palpatine is, in my opinion, one of the most evil characters in fiction. Anakin's, downfall, in the first place, was because of Palpatine, one of the main influencers. Though Anakin would see through Palpatine in the end. Unfortunately for Anakin, it would be too late. Palpatine promised Anakin things he would never be able to do, such as the ability to stop people from dying. Now, for anybody who's read the Darth Plagueis novel, Plagueis was on the verge of actually discovering immortality. Palpatine was taking advantage of Anakin's obsession with stopping Padme from dying to manipulate him to fall to the dark side. Everything was a plan that Palpatine had conjured up for decades. Anakin was the end game for the galaxy, what he intended to use as his enforcer. Anakin, believing that Palpatine would be the only person that could help him, was easy prey, and that is the reason why Anakin would fall to the dark side and why it would happen so fast, because he had this trust that Palpatine has basically given to Anakin for years. Palpatine is the reason why Anakin basically became who he was. I don't think Anakin would have become the Darth Vader we know from the original trilogy without, his influence. Now Palpatine, the evil bastard, we all know where he ends up in the end. And we do not acknowledge Rise of Skywalker as canon. Fuck that. Anakin Skywalker, his relationship with Palpatine would take a different turn when Palpatine would reveal that he was the Dark Lord. Now, Anakin would feel betrayed and tempted to kill him because he feels like he was lied to for years. Now, this reaction is natural for Anakin, but Palpatine would know that, and he would anticipate this, but would manipulate him more in order to get his apprentice, the one he actually wanted the whole time. Anakin would do what Palpatine would expect him to do. Report to the Jedi that were on Coruscant. Mace Windu would come. Palpatine would create a scene. Anakin would see what, Palpatine wanted him to see, and the rest is history. Palpatine would continue to manipulate Anakin for the rest of Revenge of the Sith until he becomes Darth Vader. And honestly, I'm going to get into it to a bit, but Anakin does not become Darth Vader when he marches to the Jedi Temple or when he fights Obi-Wan. He's Darth Vader the moment he gets inside the suit. In my opinion, when the mask comes on and he takes his first breath as Vader, that is the real birth of Darth Vader. But I'll get into that in the basically in the conclusion of my lore talk, Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine, Darth Sidious at this point, would, after he saves Anakin's life, in the Mustafar duel, would manipulate him again. And through the rest of his life, he would basically keep Vader as his enforcer and would look for other apprentices, and he would look for somebody that could replace him, Luke Skywalker. Palpatine is the puppet master. He manipulated Anakin Skywalker, and he tried to do it to his son. Anakin would break free from his manipulation when he sees his son dying in agony. And Anakin would remember Padme. That's my interpretation of that moment, by the way. That's not canon. It's just my interpretation. When Darth Vader dies and Anakin is reborn at that moment, that is when he breaks free from Palpatine's manipulation once and for all. And instead of dying as one of the most evil men in the galaxy, he dies as Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine, without his influence on Anakin, many events in the Star Wars galaxy would be different. Without his influence, you would never have Darth Vader. Hell, without Palpatine's influence, you would probably have a drastically different galaxy. That moment in the chamber where Anakin made the decision that would basically alter the fates of billions, if not trillions of beings. Palpatine was a crafty bastard, but he would lose in the end when Anakin would break free from his manipulations. He would try to do it to Luke in Dark Empire, and if you want to acknowledge that abomination as canon, he would attempt to do it to Kylo Ren and Rey, but he would ultimately be destroyed. So yeah, Palpatine was one manipulative bastard. Now I like to get to the moment, in my opinion, where I feel like Anakin died and would be dead for 20 years and Darth Vader was born. In my opinion, when Anakin becomes Darth Vader, it doesn't happen when he kneels before the future Emperor of the galaxy. It doesn't happen when he kills the younglings in the Jedi Temple. It doesn't even happen when he chokes Padme. The moment Anakin dies and Darth Vader is born is when he breathes his first breath and Padme breathes her last. Now, if you pay attention to how the scene is shot, I won't show footage here because I do not want to get this copyright strike. You can find it easily on YouTube. You could see Padme. She's about to breathe her last, and Vader breathes his first. Anakin and Padme both die at the same time. In this scene, Darth Vader, or I actually would think he's Anakin, since we're going by the movie here, the novelization, it's great. I think it elaborates further what I'm talking about. but for those who haven't read the novel will not get it. The first thing Anakin asks when he's in the suit, "Where is Padme?" And Sidious tells him, "It seems in your anger you killed her." In the movie, Vader, now before becoming Vader completely, in anger and rage, unable to accept that he failed, but he knows he has, Anakin dies knowing that all of this was for nothing. Everything he did, his betrayal of the Jedi Order, betraying all of his friends, all of it was for nothing. And the only thing he had left was his master, who he hated with a passion. But there's nobody he hated more than himself. This scene in the movie and the novel is when Darth Vader was truly born. Of course, it's sentimental material, and I'm going by legends here, not canon. Elaborates that Vader, the death of Padme, still affects him to this day. It affects him for the rest of his life, actually. And the death of Padme and his love for her is the reason why Anakin, when he became Darth Vader, never fully embraced the dark side, and why he never reached his full potential as a Sith Lord. And yeah, though, when did Vader die? Vader died in Return of the Jedi when Luke is tortured by the Emperor. And Vader, who sees his own son getting burned to death by Force lightning. And Anakin, in Vader, sees the Emperor and then sees his son. And instead of standing there doing nothing as his own flesh and blood dies, Vader does the very thing that he hasn't done in many years, and puts his own life over those that he cares about and sacrifices everything. Now, whether you think Anakin deserved redemption or not is up for debate, because there's a lot of debate to be had if Anakin's redemption was deserved. However, Anakin, if there's one thing he couldn't stand, was seeing people he loved die. And Luke was about to be another one of his failures. He failed Padme. He failed Ahsoka. He failed Obi-Wan. He failed pretty much everybody that he cared about. He lost everything. Anakin saving Luke and accepting his own death was Anakin overcoming his fear of death and his fear of losing what he is afraid to lose. Anakin did not learn the lesson that his mother, and his Jedi masters have been teaching him until the end of his life. Now, Anakin's impact on the galaxy varies depending on what canon you follow. Now, in canon, it's not as well established at this point in time, but Vader's reviled and hated as same as Anakin. The descendants of the Skywalkers, their legacy is mixed because of them being related to Vader. It wasn't public knowledge until at a later point in the timeline. Now, considering my lack of canon knowledge, I might get some details wrong, so I'm going to switch to legends. Anakin Skywalker's legacy is mixed. You know, he did a lot of good for the galaxy, but he did a lot of evil too. And his descendants, how they would be affected, vary. Ben Solo in canon would not know that Anakin and Darth Vader were the same person until later. I can't specify when it happens because I haven't read the Kylo Ren miniseries. But it didn't turn out so well. When Ben Solo learns about who his grandfather truly was. His daughter, Leia, in either in canon and legends, Leia wasn't able to forgive her father. In canon, though, she refuses to forgive either Vader or Anakin. While in canon, Leia names one of her sons to honor Anakin Skywalker. And you do have a Anakin that actually does die as a Jedi, Anakin Solo, who dies as a hero. Another one of Anakin's descendants, Jacen Solo, he would go down a similar path that Anakin did, but unlike his grandfather, Darth Caedus, aka Jacen Solo, his reasoning for falling to the dark side would have to do with his other descendant, Alana Solo, about a vision he would see in the future of a dark man on the throne with his daughter by his side. That would be his reasoning. As for his other descendant, the last one that we know about in Legends, Cade Skywalker, the protagonist of the Legacy comics, he wants nothing to do with his family's legacy. And he would not look at Anakin with, anything but contempt. So Anakin does have a mixed legacy. His family members, whether it's the Skywalkers, and the Solos, would have a mix of, reactions to him. Han would actually feel some sympathy to Anakin when he learns of what Anakin went through in the novel Tatooine Ghost. In fact, Leia learning about Anakin's childhood and what he lived through would actually soften her view of her father. In fact, Anakin's legacy is the reason Leia was reluctant to have children in Legends. And it wouldn't be until visiting his home planet would Leia actually be influenced to actually have children of her own. Now, whether it's in Legends or canon, Anakin's impact is mixed, amongst his family and the galaxy at large. But it doesn't change the fact that Anakin is the most influential, Star Wars character, in the entirety of the canon. Without Anakin Skywalker, there is no Star Wars saga. Anakin Skywalker is one of my favorite characters, even though, thanks to the EU, my favorite, Star Wars character is, his son Luke and his descendant Jacen Solo and Jaina Solo. I still think Anakin Skywalker is a great character, and his story is a great one. His fall and redemption, I think, is a great story and is something that I feel like will stand the test of time for many generations to come. Now, I did use sources from Legends mostly over canon, but I mostly use stuff that is in the films themselves. Anakin Skywalker, I do feel like any one of us could be him. Any one of us could, turn into an Anakin if circumstances in our lives turned out differently. If you were surrounded by different kinds of people. Anakin teaches us that it is dangerous to not let things go and not accept that there are things that we cannot change, that we can only do what we can do. We can't do what's impossible. Thank you, everyone, for watching this long lore video. Next time, I'll be focusing on Luke Skywalker. This will be probably something that will take even longer to get out than this one, but I'm looking forward to it. May the Force be with you. See you guys next time with another video. And as always, stay safe.